The next speaker here is Gro Amdam. She is known as a science communicator, and she has a title on her talk, Pimp Your Research. Gro Amdam is professor at the Arizona State University in Tempe, and she also holds a part-time position at the University of Life Sciences at Ås. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you here to the podium and listen to your talk. Your podium is yours, Gro.
Can you hear me in the back? Better? Testing, testing. Honeybee, 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 honeybee. Higher, higher? Is better? Okay, perfect. So usually I talk about honeybees. Today I'll talk about pimping your research. However, you will see pictures from the research that we do on bees. Almost all of these pictures have been part of our media strategy, and you will see some notes on where the pictures have been used. So, pimping your research. Pimping your research is not dumbing it down. Pimping your research is to gussy it up. Make something more available, give it a smart appearance, so people will be engaged and enthusiastic and willing to hear what you have to say. So why should we communicate science? This is just my take on it. So knowledge is a public good, and it's defined as such by the World Health Organization. We're all scientists. You can look at the data. Knowledge and education is positively correlated with career development, income, health, and even lifespan. So knowledge is about quality of life. At the level of populations, knowledge contributes to national stability and equality in societies. Equality is often measured as relatively small differences in income, in which Norway is one example. But there's also other measures of equality that has to do with acceptance for alternative lifestyles, for example. So knowledge is positively associated with all of these public goods. In addition, it's often the public that pays, right? So how many of you are on money from the Norwegian Research Council? Yeah, so that's tax money, or maybe oil, I don't know. It's important that those that provide funding for research understand the value of research. When I started getting my first grant from the Norwegian Research Council 15 years ago, there was no requirement of a popular summary of the work I would do. They only needed a scientific statement, a scientific proposal. Now, I need to provide a popularized summary that would go online so the Norwegian Research Council can show what kind of research that we do in a way that makes it clear to everybody the value of the research. And so the Norwegian Research Council that get their federal funds or governmental funds, they have become a knowledge enterprise that's not only kind of providing research funds for scientists anymore, but are channeling this knowledge out to the population. So just from a kind of like selfish perspective, communicating science to the population, getting acceptance for science being something that people should pay for, is good. It's good for people and it's good for you because it provides research funds potentially for your future career. So communicating knowledge to the public is good. It's good for the public, it's good for your colleagues, and it's good for you. So why not do it? When I talk with people, there's usually kind of like a little bit of like a but, in the sense that people say, what I do is, you know, it's at the forefront of research. It's complicated stuff. It's hard for me even to explain what I do to my parents. I had that feeling when I was a PhD student, and it actually took a couple of years before I could fully communicate what I did to my mom. But you know, retrospectively, I actually disagree that it should be so difficult. It's all about the mode of presentation. Do any of you know what this is? What is that? You know it. What is it?
Large Hadron Collider.
Yes, it's a kind of a particle accelerator in CERN. So I have a 2-year-old son, and when he was 18 months, it was the first time he said particle accelerator. So he's bilingual, so he said that in English. And because I had a book, and it was a picture of this, and he was curious what it was, and I explained to him in very simple terms what it was, and he wanted one. It sounded really exciting with things crashing, colliding together, and becoming kind of visible. Invisible things colliding, becoming visible. So he wanted to see that. Now, you might think it's odd that an 18-month-old child says particle accelerator. But my son was 11 months when he said dog. Now, what is a dog? So this is some of the genetics of dog breeds. We don't even know if it was one or several domestication events for wolf becoming dogs. I would argue that it's harder to explain what a dog is than what the particle collider is. Both dogs and the collider are man-made, but there's lots of things that we don't know about dogs. So why should it be so difficult to explain what a particle accelerator is? It doesn't have to be. And for my son, it really doesn't matter that something might seem more complex than the other. As long as I can provide an explanation, he's perfectly happy. He wants a dog too, but we don't have a dog. So we don't have a dog and we don't have a particle accelerator. So it's all about the mode of presentation. So I'm going to give you some very concrete examples for how to make your research more available, pimping it. I say that pimping starts before you publish. Okay. I'll talk about how to make your manuscript user-friendly, meaning more user-friendly for you, more available for others, for colleagues, and for people who might just want to take a look at it. Maybe even your family. And how to make your accepted articles more visible. So in the process of publishing it after it's become accepted, how can you make it more visible and more ripe for further pimping? In my opinion, the best way of making your article user-friendly, because you can't do much to the scientific mode of presentation, but what you can do is to make the most out of your figures. Now, first of all, this is not a great figure. I want to point that out. But I want to contrast this to what you could do with this kind of figure. This is a figure that's supposed to explain the influences and potential outcomes of school meals. This was a paper I did with some colleagues, and one of the postdocs involved made this kind of flowchart figure saying that we need to have like one figure where we can say, this is what the paper is about. And then we can use it for presentations, and we can give it to the media, and we can hand it out as a little, note when we talk with people. And I said, okay, I'm lucky. I work at a university with a professional, I want to say pimping department, but that's not what I mean, professional illustrators. So my unit has 4 professional illustrators. And this is what they did with that figure. So I'm not going to go into the details of the figure. What I want is just to show you the contrast. So this is now a figure. If people look at the paper, they will go like, oh, I see this figure. Maybe I can understand this paper. Maybe this paper is interesting. This is a flowchart that we gave to the media together with a popular press summary flowchart or figure that can be translated into Norwegian if we want to pimp it here, and so on and so forth. Another example, this was a paper I did with a colleague where we looked at the willingness to pay paradigm for Fox. You don't get too much out of this drawing, and this is what it looks like when it's pimped. The willingness to pay paradigm is basically a fox here who knows that behind a door there's either a friend, so they can socialize with, or there's food. And there's a little handle here that they can pull with their leg. And you basically count how many of these pulls they're willing to do to meet the friend or to have the food. And the experiment shows that the fox will pull more for food. They're more interested in eating than being friendly. So this again, if you have a good visualization associated with your paper, it's much easier to communicate what's in it. The figure forces you to conceptualize what you have done, what the paper is about, and it makes it much easier to explain. So if you can incorporate these kinds of figures, maybe you can make these yourself. I usually get help from the illustrators. Now your paper is accepted, it has a nice figure. How can you make it more visible? When people get into my office in the US, they see a lot of covers hanging on the wall, and they go like, wow, did the journals invite you to provide cover images? That's awesome. And I go like, invited me? Not really. So, and people go like, but how did you get so many journal covers? And I say, I told them that this is what they should print. Basically, I just make a cover mock-up and I send it to the journal. And I said, wouldn't peace look great on your cover? Sorry, I stole kind of your look, but wouldn't this be great? And the journal says, yeah, that looks awesome, actually. And the right time to do this is when the journal is processing your proofs. Then you have a copy editor that you work with that can put you in touch with the editor that will select the cover. Most authors will submit an image to the journal as part of their general submission for consideration for the cover. But that's like, come on, for one issue of the journal, maybe 30, 40 images. They don't want to look at all those 30, 40 images when they get this. And they're like, oh, I just saved myself a lot of work, and this looks great. And on it goes. I have an 80% success rate with this. You should try it too. Usually I send them 2 or 3 alternative covers so they feel they have a choice. The nice thing too is that even if they might not want this for the cover because they're doing a genome issue on octopus or something, if you have really captivating images, they might choose your article for an editorial commentary because they would like to have your beautiful picture in the journal, although it's not on the cover. So those are our images that have not ended up on the cover. Many of them ends up in the journal anyhow, but not on the front page. And when you have a commentary, the podium is set for pimping. So your article is published, and now you're reaching out to the press, the media. And many talk with me about the challenges they feel they face when they work with newspapers, TV, and so on. And one is that media can find entertainment more interesting than science, so they feel that they constantly have to compete with, I don't know, celebrities and some new cool stuff, entertaining, who won Dancing with the Stars, and that they don't really get their message through when they contact a medium. Some are concerned that a misunderstanding about their story can lead to a misrepresentation of their work. And as scientists, because we work so hard, doing our best to find an answer to the question that we had, finding high-quality data, putting together a publication, finding support for our work, writing a good discussion, weighing the pros and cons and so on. We put so much effort in that. And we have reviewers, looking things over, criticizing us. We want things to be right? After all of that work. And so people are really concerned that something should come out that's not right. And people are concerned that media have a negative focus. So what about my story about like foxes pulling the little handle becoming a terrible story about fox farming? You don't want that. Because media can't be controlled, and media shouldn't be controlled. But scientists, we're used to trying to control things because that's how we do experiments, right? We want to control as much as feasible. But the media, we can't control the media. And you have to let go of this desire of control when you're dealing with them. But how can this be okay? How can this not be nerve-wracking? You minimize the risk of pimping by telling an engaging, interesting story that people would like to hear. If a journalist reads a really cool science story where they hardly have to do anything to kind of present it to the public, they're super happy. There's not too many really sciencey journalists out there anymore. And you need to reach everybody. You can't expect that a journalist is going to take your paper, even with a nice figure, and go like, yeah, I get this. If you can tell the story that they want to tell, they're just going to adopt your story. And then you can beat the entertainment because you are entertaining. You keep it simple. You avoid misunderstandings. They take your story. They don't make it more complicated, so you're safe there. And you choose, when you write the story, you choose what information to give the media and what information to not provide to the media. So this is one of the images that we didn't provide to the media. And as a scientist, I'm used to seeing this all of the time. So these needles don't actually go through the insects. It's basically just pacifying them. We pacify bees like this. So these have little number tags, so we know who they are. And we're, for example, keeping them pacified to take a blood sample. But this can look disturbing, and the story can become, Amdam is torturing honeybees. And honeybees are in decline, so this is terrible. Okay? And you don't want that. You don't want that, I don't want that. So we don't give these kinds of pictures to the media. I'm fortunate in that my university has a lot of focus on public outreach, on media contact, and whenever we have a TV or a newspaper journalist coming in to visit, I have a media representative walk through the lab with me, and she goes like, that poster needs to go, because that has a picture of a bee that looks like she's in pain. And I'm like, that just looks like a bee to me, but if you say so, that's okay. It's nice to have a person looking over your shoulder that can see things like the journalist would see it. Because sometimes you don't see it that because you look at your animal or your project or experiment in such a different way. So if you're concerned with what the media could do to your story, just make sure that you know which information reaches the media and what information does not. That because you can't control the media, they should not be controlled, but you can control the information that they receive from you. So what is a good overall pimping strategy, in my opinion? The university needs to be responsible for support. So we're scientists, we spend a lot of time familiarizing and researching a subject and writing complicated, fantastic science stories for science journals. But translating this into the engaging, fun story that a journalist would just kind of like drowl over and say, whoa, I need to print this. That's not something that we're educated to do. So the university needs to have resources that enables us to do that. And with that comes visualization. For example, taking stunning pictures of what you do. getting in touch with media and training on working with journalists. And that can be empowering for scientists and make them less concerned and more able to talk freely and in a fun way about their research, which is really important if you're going to have a good collaboration with the media. And the university should, of course, encourage pimping. The scientist, you need to be the storyteller. It really doesn't work that someone in the media department or the head of the department or the rector or someone tells your story, because the journalist wants the story to be about you and what you found. There was this amazing story, I think, this morning in Norwegian newspapers about plasma tubes surrounding the Earth. Do you see it? And it was a 23-year-old undergraduate student that was credited with the finding. It was important that they said that, okay? So you need to be there at the forefront of the study. You should be the voice of the press release. You should be the voice of the interview. You should be available for the media. I actually have a fever right now. My kid brought the virus back from school. But I want to be here. You need to be available. It doesn't matter if someone calls you in the middle of the night. Maybe that's their time zone. If you have a story and it's going public right then, you need to be available because the journalists need their story to be printed that day. And if you're unavailable, there's no story. So you need to be available, and you need to encourage others to pimp. You can't go like your fellow colleague, oh, I saw you pimp a story in Dagbladet yesterday, and I think your hair looked a little bit soggy. You go like, that was great that you had that story yesterday. Wow, I wish I could do that. Norwegians are not super great at that kind of behavior, but in the US, it's the norm. It's shameful not to show that type of appreciation in the US. So it's the reverse of janteloven, and you need to be like that. If you want to grow the media coverage on the research at this university, you need to be there for each other, and you need to encourage each other to pimp. It needs to be cool to do the pimping. Together, you and the department or the university should discuss the trade-off between national pimping and international pimping. I'm used to always thinking international for pimping. You publish in English, I work in the US, English is the language, it's very easy to make, available worldwide. Whereas in Norway, I often get like, oh, don't tell anybody. We want to get in touch with Aftenposten or, VG or somebody, and we want to sell this as an exclusive story. That can be the right strategy. However, sometimes that newspaper might not be interested. And what happens then? You need to have that conversation, and you need to have a voice and say, I want to pimp this internationally. I want to have my story at Eureka Alert. This is a worldwide source that also Norwegian science journalists or journalists in general can search for news stories. I want to have my story there, and if a journalist from Aftenposten finds it there, I'm available. I'm even in his or her time zone, so that's going to work out quite great. Or you might agree that based on previous publications in Aftenposten, maybe it's a topic that's rolling and it's very hot in the media, that this is a great time to sell your story to Aftenposten. But you should be aware of this, because too many times have I seen Norwegian science stories become undersold in the media because of a very narrow press strategy from the university wanting to sell the story to one of the big Norwegian newspapers. And if everything works well, and you have a good communication with the media, meaning that, if you have an interview with a journalist, ask them, how do you understand what I'm saying? Can I do better? the journalist is actually a resource for you in improving your pimping ability, because they will say, well, you know, that kind of work, but I really don't get that part. You should encourage the people that you talk with to give you that information so you can become better, and you should share that information amongst yourself. So getting feedback from people that you talk with that are in the media, it's important. And if all of this works, then something that's like this, which actually seems kind of awkward, in the laboratory and during free flight, old honeybees reveal learning and extinction deficits that mirror mammalian functional decline, becomes this. Old bees forget their home way to hive. Right? So this was a story that got a lot of press. People really could relate to old honeybees not finding their way home. And that was not, like, this heading, that was not my idea. That was one of the press resource people or media resource people at my unit in the US. But this is what professional people can help you do. And then you become better. And after a while, you can do it on your own. So I want to look at an example, and this is a little bit like an older example. It's from 2011. I chose it for a reason, and you will see that towards the end. So this is one of my former PhD students. He's now starting a faculty job in the US after having had a postdoc in a different lab. So he was the corresponding author of this paper, which had a long, complicated name with hormones and genes and so on. But he was really interested in pimping this paper. And he was one of my students who were really kind of interested in communication. You can see him here communicating with these chickens here. And so I said, okay, you know, you do it. Often I do it, but he wanted to do it. So I said, you do it. And he worked with one of the media resource people to develop a press release. And we had a 3-step pimping strategy. One was that the university news page provided the press release, but also lots of images of him and the bees and so on. A REC alert, which is this resource abstract database for pictures and news stories, what's hot about science. So we put it there, and also we had submitted an image that didn't become a cover, but that became an editorial commentary in the Journal of Experimental Biology. So they published, in parallel with these, an editorial commentary. And the commentary looked like this, and that was the picture. So I just kind of did this Google thing prior to the launch of the story, and just to see kind of what was the baseline number of hits that I could get on Google with Adam and honeybee. So that was about 350 hits, and some were previous papers that he had been on, and my lab, and so on. So that was kind of the baseline. So 12 hours after the launch, we got about 1,000 hits. And then I started searching just specifically for the title of the press release. So not the general search anymore for his name, but just, this was the protein love triangle story. And it plateaued at about 9,000 hits just for the press release. Okay, so that's not all the additional news stories that didn't cite the specific title of the press release. And here's the release with pictures. So this is the what we submitted, that's the front cover, and these are actually honeybee larvae in small dishes in the lab. So this is the release on Eureka Alert. That's what it looks like there. So this tells you something. When you just do this, you don't go to Aftenposten, you don't go to Dagbladet, how visible something can be in a very short time. When things become this visible, journalists start calling you because this is hot, right? This is, with all the additional things going on, this is trending now. And I previously, when I showed this, I also had the Twitter feed, and that was going, and so on. So this is a way you can make a good story very visible in a very short time. The picture went around the world and became like feature in spectacular photos of the week and things like that. But as I was looking through kind of at least some of the pages where this was mentioned, there was one page that struck me and was the reason why I chose this story today, because it brings us back to the point of knowledge being a public good. And that was this page here. And I want you to look at it. So the person running this page described himself as obsessed with the dream of forming a just, pious, God-fearing society. And what was on the blog before the bee story was Saudi Arabia in quest of a bomb. So I don't know anything about this person, but I feel much better when he puts bees on his page than when he talks about bombs. And my point is that knowledge is a public good, and you have no idea how the information you put there can be used, but you know it's a good use. And I would say that communicating your knowledge is not just something that can be really fun and engaging, it's also an obligation. It's your obligation to society to do this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a present from us.
Oh, Pascal, wonderful.
Yeah.
I love chocolate.
And, yeah, I think we have room for one or two questions. Are there anyone who wanted to?
Any question is allowed.
Any questions?
Will we lose the bees?
Not now. The question is about the news stories on the global decline of bees. So not only honeybees, which is my research, but bees in general. And what is true is that there's been documented a colony collapse disorder in commercial strains of honeybees. So this is a particular disease that has many causes, but the releasing factor is the, I would say, the disuse of bees in commercial pollination. So this is not a problem of hobby beekeepers. This is not a problem in Norway, but it's a problem in the countries that use honeybees as almost like slaves in pollinating crops. This is hard work for bees. They're shuttled from crop to crop, and they're not fed properly. And any animal would refuse to do that work after some time. The solution to making bees more resilient so they can handle the diseases that are out there that causes colonies to collapse is to reduce the pressure. This is difficult now because bees in general, which is the other part of this, is in decline because of habitat loss. And there's many thousand species of bees. We have more than 200 in Norway. Those are natural pollinators. When they decline because of loss of habitat, honeybees have to do the work for them. Pushing honeybees to work harder is obviously not working. So this is kind of a double-edged sword in the sense that bees are on the decline for different reasons. So you have the commercial honeybee that's declining for one reason. You have the wild bees that are declining for another reason, but because they're in this relationship, skjebnefellesskap, things don't look too good. However, this has happened before, that honeybees have died at a very high rate. And the response of the industry has been to scale back on the pressure on honeybees, making crops more expensive, and we have to pay more, basically because there's less production from the plants that the bees would otherwise pollinate. So this is not an immediate threat. It's a big concern that you have the habitat loss for the wild bees. It's a concern that honeybees are pushed to a limit. What will happen is that that needs to stop, the overuse of honeybees. We will then have more expensive fruits and vegetables at Kiwi.
Okay, thank you. One question from Sunniva Rose.
Well, first of all, thank you for a very inspiring talk. I have, maybe this is more of a comment than a question, but it was very inspiring with your idea with, well, showing the pictures to the, I mean, who doesn't want to be on the front page of Nature? But I'm guessing maybe it's easier with bees and flowers than to have, like, I could have a beautiful picture of an atomic bomb, but I mean, I'm a nuclear physicist. I think it's maybe more difficult for physicists to, or at least some of us, to have like beautiful, inspiring pictures for the journals. I don't know if you have any. I mean,
you're right. I have a colleague that works with diarrhea. And she comments on how difficult it is to make diarrhea look good. And I'm very sympathetic. However, you can make really beautiful pictures of diarrhea-causing bacteria. So there's a way of making diarrhea look good, although maybe not in the way, you know, that she doesn't see the bacteria. Normally she wouldn't think of making a picture of it. But if she works with someone that has imaging capability, you can take beautiful, for example, confocal images, very spacey looking images of bacteria. So I think it's also being willing to show your science maybe in a way that you don't think of it every day, that can maybe even for a physicist allow you to get the front cover.
But then maybe you need people that can help us with those pictures.
Of course.
Absolutely. Yes, and this needs to be a strategy fueled from the university level, because it does require resources. I'm lucky because most of the images, including this, is taken by my hubby, and I don't pay him. But if you had a professional photographer spending the amount of time you need to take this kind of picture, there can be thousands and thousands of Norwegian kroners. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Gro, for a very fruitful and important advice to the students and, of course, to us as an institution. So thank you very much.